Hi guys, I have our midweek read aloud for this week. We are in our Advent study as we lead up to Christmas, and this week has been about joy. And I hope that you have been able to follow along with us. We started with, do you remember? Hope, and then we moved to peace. And now this week is about joy. Next week will be about love, the love of God sending Jesus to us. If you would like to begin looking for some good love books and Bible stories, Bible verses. And of course, the greatest story of love being God sending his son Jesus to this earth for us. And that is what we are focused on right now. We are using some children's books just to think about different ways that we can experience these characteristics that God has created for us. And so this week I'm going to read to you The Trees of the Dancing Goats by Patricia Polacco. And if you look at the cover, you might notice that not only is there a Christmas tree, but there's also what is called a menorah that Jewish people use for celebrating the holiday Hanukkah. So this book is going to have to do with both Christians and Jews. And so if you have more questions about the Jewish celebration of Hanukkah, I would encourage you to look at that, maybe with your parents, and learn about it. When I was a child, I was really interested in the Hanukkah tradition and learning more about those, why they celebrate the way that they do and all of that. So it's very interesting. And of course, it has its roots in the Old Testament and God's Jewish people. Okay. The Trees of the Dancing Goats. You can see lots of snow. Where do you think this book might take place? At our farm, just outside Union City, Michigan, we didn't celebrate the same holidays as most of our neighbors, but we shared in their delight and anticipation of them just the same. So they're in Michigan, and you know, it looks probably to you like olden days, right? And this lady even looks like she might be from a different country, the way she's dressed, doesn't she? So it says that they didn't celebrate the same holidays as their neighbors. So they must celebrate Hanukkah, right? What do you think their neighbors celebrate? Such cold the winter brings, my babushka said, as she looked out at our front window. My bones it makes to ache. She slapped her chest. Then she caught my eye and winked. She wasn't fooling me. I knew how much she loved the snow. It reminded her of her homeland in the Ukraine. Carla, again you complain, but still you watch the snow with such light in your eyes, Grandpa said as he threw her a kiss. My grandfather was from Soviet Georgia, way to the south of Russia. He and Babushka spoke Russian and had wonderful accents. They kept their homelands in their hearts, even though they would never be permitted to return. Just then, Mama rolled into the long driveway. Mama's home, my brother Richard called as we watched her get out of the car. Mama drove way over to Battle Creek every day to teach school, but now she would be off for 2 weeks because of the holiday season. I loved having her home for winter vacation. This year we would have a week together to prepare, and then 8 days of Hanukkah festivities. The next day, Mama took out our old tarnished menorah and asked me to polish it. While I rubbed, I watched my grandmother make the candles that we would put in it. Babushka tied long strings to a metal rod, and she dipped them into a pot of melted beeswax that she kept on the stove. Then she hung the wax-covered strings on the wall to dry before dipping them again into another layer of wax. She hummed as she dipped. She never seemed to tire of the long process. So they make their own candles for their menorah. I'm guessing either candles weren't easily available then, or maybe they didn't have a lot of money to buy store-bought candles. Grandpa prepared for our festival of lights as well. He carved small toys out of wood. Richard and I weren't supposed to know that he was making them for us. They're kind of cute, aren't they? The little animals. But he did every year. And that afternoon, when he went to town, we couldn't help sneaking into his workroom to take a peek. "Look, a dancing goat," my brother exclaimed. It's this one right here, if you can see it. "I like this one," I said, cradling a little dog in my palm. There's a little dog, I think. Grandpa had painted the animals with colors from his homeland. We marveled at how magical that they were. "Do you think he made enough for all 8 days of Hanukkah?" Richard asked as he eyed the array of wooden figures. "You know he has," I whispered. I took one lasting look, knowing that soon Grandpa would wrap them up in colored paper. Very talented, right? That would be nice. My mother called for me, and I thought she had caught us spying, but she only wanted me to go over to the Krimmels for some cornmeal. The Krimmels, our nearest neighbors, lived half a mile down the road. They were farmers, like us, and at harvest time, Mr. Krimmel always helped Grandpa. All the neighbors helped each other that way. "Friendship means something," Grandpa always said, "especially for those who till the soil." I practically lived at the Krimmels' house because Cherry Krimmel was my very best friend. We loved the holiday season when I'd watch her family decorate their Christmas tree, and she'd watch my family light our menorah. I knew as we were bustling in anticipation of the festival of lights at our house, the Krimmels would be preparing for the arrival of Christmas at theirs. But when I got there, I found everybody quite sick. Even Cherry, who was usually full of spizzarinto, as my babushka would say. She seemed quiet and weak. She was crying. "I hope Santa will remember where we live," she wailed. "Well, why wouldn't he?" I asked. "'Cause we haven't put up a tree this year or even decorated. Papa's too sick to get out of bed and go chop one down." Then she coughed an awful cough. I ran home and burst into our house with news about Cherry and her family. Mama seemed very worried. "Did you go inside their house, Tricia?" she asked me. "Sure," I answered. "Uh-oh," my brother said. They all looked at each other. "When your grandfather was in town today," Babushka said very slowly, "Dr. Leach told him that many families around here have come down with scarlet fever. The Krimmels must have it, and I sent you there," my mother said as she rushed me to the bathroom, pulled off my clothes, and soundly scrubbed every inch of me. "Am I going to get it, Mama?" I asked. "It's very contagious," she answered. "We'll know in a few days." "Am I going to die?" I asked, starting to cry. "No, baby," Mama said softly as she held me close, "but if you have it, it will make you quite sick." For the next few days, my family watched me carefully. Richard, of course, took pleasure in making me feel like I was quarantined. He held a cloth over his mouth and nose every time he came near me. Then he'd hack and gag, mimicking the dreadful cough of the fever. We could probably make a lot of connections to this with our current situation, with a lot of people being quarantined or ill with the coronavirus or other things, right? It's interesting to kind of see the parallels. As the days passed, it was evident that I was not going to get sick, but more and more reports came to us of neighbors falling ill. The Everests, the Govlocks, the Tunderwalds, the Moleskis. It was an epidemic. We were all worried about our friends, but Babushka was determined that our festival of lights would go on as planned. On the afternoon before Hanukkah, she bustled around her kitchen. "Such latkes I'll make this year," she exclaimed, while digging for the choicest potatoes in the bin. She hummed happily as she placed the potatoes in front of me. I shredded them with great care. They had to be just right for my babushka's latkes. Mama and Babushka dressed down 2 chickens for roasting and put them in the oven. So they have some traditional foods that they make at Hanukkah, latkes, I don't know how exactly to say it, but just like we have our traditional, probably Christmas sweets and Christmas dinners. Just as the aroma of the wonderful feast met our nostrils, the sun set, and it was time to light the menorah. Grandpa recited the blessings and lit the shomas, the candle used to light all the others. Babushka put the first candle in the menorah and lit it with the shomas. Then Mama told the story, as she did every year, of our people long ago. Tonight we are celebrating miracles, she started. The miracle that a very small band of Jewish farmers turned soldiers could defeat a huge Syrian army. Were they really farmers before they were soldiers? Richard asked. Simple farmers, Grandpa answered, just like us. They were fighting so that they could worship in their own way, my mother added. Then there was the miracle of light, my grandfather said, with a twinkle in his eye. 1 little tiny drop of oil burned in the temple for 8 days. Such a miracle, my babushka exclaimed. Miracles can happen even today, Grandpa said quietly. After dinner, Grandpa handed us our first beautifully wrapped presents. He looked troubled, though. You know, he began, our neighbors are having such a hard time, and this should be a time of gladness for them. If only we could do something to make their holiday special. His voice trailed off. Babushka thought for a while. They always bring a tree into their house. Only in America does a tree grow right out of the living room floor. She rocked with laughter. Carla, we should cut down trees and take them into their houses, Grandpa announced. Babushka smiled in agreement. I'll cut them tonight. You can help, Richard, Grandpa said, already pulling on his winter coat. We can dress down more chickens and take them food, Babushka said as she scurried into the kitchen. Mama and I can decorate the trees, I shouted excitedly. But this is not our custom. We have nothing to decorate the trees with, my grandmother said. What about the carvings? My mother said softly. They both looked at me. What do you think? They have no way of making their children happy this year. At first I was a little disappointed, but then as I thought about it, I knew it was the right thing to do. Our neighbors needed cheering, and we were just about the only ones that didn't have the fever. Grandpa and Richard brought the cut trees into our living room. They nailed boards onto the bottom of each one so they would stand up. They were very small trees. Grandpa had only taken the tops off of our evergreens, but they were beautiful. And when they were all standing in the living room, it looked like a forest. Like the woods just outside of Kiev when I was a little girl, Babushka said breathlessly. Grandpa started hanging some of his wooden animals on the branches of a tree. A dancing goat, my babushka remarked as she looked closely at one of them. We shall call these the trees of the dancing goats. We made sure to hang a dancing goat on each and every tree. There's another one of the dancing goats. As we decorated the trees, we sang and laughed. The single candle in the menorah flickered as we rushed past it to reach another carved animal or to paste together paper chains to hang on the trees. We all worked into the night. While Grandpa, Richard, and I finished the decorating, Babushka and Mama roasted more chickens and fried more potato latkes. They packed the food in baskets, and in each one Babushka put one of her homemade Hanukkah candles. So they will have the light of God in their hearts, and so that God will protect them and make them well again, she murmured. We loaded Grandpa's old Ford with trees and the food baskets and sent Babushka and Grandpa into the early light of dawn with their Christmas cheer. Just like Santa, my brother said. Mr. and Mrs. Santa, I added. We waited eagerly for their return later that morning. We thrilled when Babushka and Grandpa told us of how they entered the home of each neighbor, set up a tree in the living room, put the basket of food on the table, and then put a candle in a holder for them to light later. Mama was a little worried that they had been exposed to the fever, but Babushka said, "In so much worse I've been, you shouldn't know from. God will protect. God will protect. This I know." A week later, the 8 days of Hanukkah had come and gone, and we sat down to have our last feast. There was a knock at the door. Now who could that be? Babushka said as she scurried to the door with her usual warm smile. It was the Krimmels. Cherry and her mom and dad. They looked pale but assured us that they were quite well now. "We have something for you," Cherry announced as she bolted through the door holding a basket. Her mother and father had tears in their eyes as they hugged my grandparents and my mother. "Look what my dad made for you," Cherry said. She pulled out a menorah that Mr. Krimmel had carved out of wood. On it, he had mounted some of the animals that we had given to them, like for them to put their candles in. And then there's the rest of the family. Can't you just see how much joy and thanks that they have for each other, especially the Krimmels have for Patricia's family? "How beautiful," my babushka said as she placed it on our table. "Come sit," Grandpa invited them. "You are so welcome." "Thank you, thank you." "Thank you, George," Mr. Krimmel said, looking into Grandpa's eyes. They sat down and shared our feast. By this time, our menorah had been lit for an hour or so, and when we lit the candles in the new menorah, we noticed something wondrous. "Look," I called out, "our old candles are exactly as tall as the new ones." "The old ones don't even look burned down," Mama said softly. "Another miracle," Grandpa said. "A miracle indeed," my babushka said, giving me a big hug. Then we all got up and danced and laughed together in the flickering candlelight. There's the menorah with the candles and the little animals on it. Our neighbors all recovered from that terrible fever. Few were left with any permanent damage. What they were left with was a long-cherished memory of that Christmas when Santa really did come. And my family, too, has never forgotten that incredible winter of the fever, the miracle of true friendship, and the trees of the dancing goats. So that was by Patricia Polacco. She writes a lot of stories about her own childhood, and this is one of those. So it's based on a true story. Isn't that neat? So I was thinking about joy and how a lot of times joy comes from things that we give and do for other people. It ends up bringing the giver more joy than it brings the person that received, doesn't it? So they made a lot of sacrifices for their neighbors, but it didn't really feel like a sacrifice, did it? Because they were so joyful about giving. And we can also have that joy every day. We can have that joy by also giving and also just knowing that God gave Jesus to us. Have a great week, guys. Bye-bye.